Hi everyone, it's Rax, and I want to talk about a topic today that's not only critical for Diablo 4, but a topic that I think every single content creator on planet Earth pretty much has made a video about except for me. And it's how does damage actually work in this game? Now, the theories have evolved over time, and the most recent theory, which we think, if not is exactly right, is very close to right, is presented here in this sheet, which I'll link. Tons of people made videos about it. Woody just released a video about it, but I want to do something slightly different than what they did. I'm going to explain it to you, but what people aren't doing that I haven't seen is people aren't actually giving you an example and showing you how it actually matters to you. So I want to explain it and then show you a simple example so it hopefully solidifies in your mind as you're making choices when you make your characters. Okay, so the million-dollar question is, how does the damage formula really work in Diablo 4? And how do these multipliers work together? Well, I'm going to spare you the whole history and the testing or whatever. By the way, big shout out to Northwar on the Maxroll team that's done a shitload of testing for this and kind of confirmed all of this. But essentially, the way that it works is there's just a few damage buckets that multiply your damage up. And pretty much every single damage multiplier that you might think could be a separate multiplier is put into this gigantic additive bucket. You don't have to be a mathematician to understand why that's bad, because that's exactly what I'm going to show you. I'm going to show you an example why this is nerfing your damage, okay? But the thing to understand, I'm going to give you the takeaway right now. So if you want to, you can close the video and just walk away. You need to start stacking your main stat, so strength, separate multiplier, your attack speed. Now your attack speed is a separate multiplier, but it's situational. That's assuming you can just stand there and just chain cast. You know, usually you have to dodge stuff. Usually you have resource problems. Okay, that's going to interfere with this like being a direct bonus, but okay, it's separated, so you put it in a different bucket. Critical strike chance and damage, all kinds of it are separate. That's godly. And vulnerable damage. Vulnerable damage being separate means on pretty much any build, you have to try your absolute best to find a way to apply vulnerable or be playing in a group where other people can apply vulnerable. If you don't have vulnerable damage on your gear, it's going to hurt you badly. Practically anything else. Oh, I have a core skill, it's whirlwind, and it applies bleed, and from the hamstring passive, it applies slow. So I'm going to stack bleeding, slow, close damage, crowd control damage, and I'm going to do 1,000,000 damage. Well, it will help. I'm not saying not to take these stats, but I am saying they're nerfed by being lumped together. Okay, so now that we know the answers, vulnerable, critical strike, attack speed, main stat, all damage, and stuff like that, let's look at an example. So here's the damage formula. We have our base damage, which is like your weapon damage times whatever skill you're using, whatever the multiplier is there, or the percentage, times your main stat, times the vulnerable, times the attack speed, times that big additive. I should have also added crit. I forgot crit. Okay, somewhere in here is times the crit stuff. And then at the end, you add overpower, okay? So we'll just ignore overpower here. We'll overpower is for a different video. Overpower is a little bit weird. Let's look at an example. So we have essentially 5 buckets here. The strength, the vulnerable, the attack speed, the additive, and the crit chance. So let's say you're playing your guy and you get like a 25% multiplier for each. You get enough strength to get 25% damage, you get 25% more damage to vulnerable, you get 25% attack speed, you get 25% total in that giant additive bucket, the bleed, the crowd control, all of that. You add it all together, you got 25, and then you got 25% more damage from your crit. What would happen in the calculation? Well, if all of them are separate, if you got one in each bucket, then your damage, if you started with 1 damage, would be 1 times 1.25 times 1.25 times 1.25. They're separated, okay? So it's 1 times 1.25 to the 5th power. Well, if they're all in the additive bucket, it's very simple. All you do is just add them up. 0.25 times 5 is 1.25, so it'd be a multiplier. You'd have to do 1 plus that. So it'd be multiplied by 2.25. Okay, well, I can solve this really easy. Here, we're doing 2.25 damage instead of 1. And 1 times 1.25 to the 5th power, 1.25 times 1.25 times 1.25 times 1.25. People are going to think I'm a caveman. I'm using paint and calculator. 3.05. Okay, so now you can see the magic here. When you add them up and then multiply them, you get much less of a multiplier than if you multiply it all separately. As we hear Callie in the background taking the biggest drinks of water a dog has ever taken. You'd think we just got her out of the Sahara Desert. I don't know if you guys can hear that. Anyway, 3, we can agree, is bigger than 2, right? So when you're making a decision about whether, oh, should I get 20 core damage or 20 vulnerable damage, putting it in one of the separate multipliers is going to help you. Let's look at another example. Let's say exactly that. You get 30 vulnerable or 30 additive. And let's say in your end game, you have 30 total vulnerable damage. And let's say you have 500 additive, because this is how it's going to work. Your weapons have a bunch of it on it. You go through the Paragon boards. Oh, core, slowed, bleed, with a mace, while stunned, You add it all up, you have about, maybe have about 500. Okay, so if we start with 30 vulnerable damage and 500 additive, what would be the difference between taking these two in the calculation? Well, in the first one, we would take the vulnerable. So instead of multiplying it by 1.3, we'd multiply it by 1.6. And the additive would just be +1, so it's the times 6. So this is the vulnerable side. And instead, if we took the additive, then it would be 1 times the regular vulnerable, 1.3, and then we'd add the 30 to the additive, which is 530, but then we'd have to have 1 to that, so it'd be 6.3. Okay, so what would happen? In the first case, we would take 1.6 times 6, we do 9.6 damage if we allocated it to the vulnerable. And over here, what would we do? We would allocate it to the giant bucket, the additive bucket, and we'd take 1.3 times 6.3. And you see it's 8.19. You can see even that small decision made actually quite a bit of difference in your damage. So I wanted to take the findings, which we've known about for a while, and I've seen 100 videos about it. Half of them are wrong, half of them are right. This is essentially what we've seen, and I don't think anybody has tested every single bucket, but from what we've seen, this, if it's not exactly right, is very, very close to being correct. You always want to take damage in these buckets that aren't a part of that gigantic additive bucket. So make sure that you're focusing on strength, vulnerable, crowd control. If you see that % all damage, that's godly. And for attack speed, it's a little bit situational, but in general, if you think your build would benefit from attack speed, then you're supposed to take it. I hope this example helps you and helps you visualize why it's better and helps you make decisions in your itemization in Diablo 4. Thank you.